How do you live a life that is significant without striving, meaningful in the mundane, and overcomes in spite of obstacles? Welcome to The Conversation, the Significant Life podcast with Jen and Marcus Jones.
Hello, and welcome to the Significant Life podcast. I am so excited about our conversation today. I have someone who actually has been extremely meaningful on my journey of motherhood, really, honestly. And also, so I know a lot of you listen in because we talk a lot about family and a lot about the home and how to create a significant life and integrate all these different parts of our high-paced, fast-living world and really actually create a healthy home. And Heather Avis is today's guest on the podcast, and she's helped me with that, especially as it relates to my daughter, Addie, my oldest, who many of you hear about often, but who has the diagnosis of Down syndrome. And so a little bit about Heather, and we are actually going to jump right into the conversation because Heather has taught me so much about inclusion. And while one of the Jones Tribe family values is definitely people, and that we believe our lives are better when other people win, and we really do value diversity in this home, Heather has educated me more and helped me actually apply that value in a greater way. And so Heather is a shouter of worth, and I'm all about owning our worth. Heather does this so well and actually has a very large microphone. It's on volume 10, and that's why I wanted her to come on because she is a narrative shifter. She is someone who is really shifting the trajectory of our world and what it looks like for all people to truly belong. She's the founder of The Lucky Few and the Lucky Few Foundation. She is also a New York Times best-selling author and podcaster. I'm pretty sure you guys just won an award, if I recall seeing that. Yeah. So she's a speaker and an influencer, and I'll tell you all the ways that you can follow her and get connected with her. But she's also just a dedicated wife and mom, and she is on mission to make a more inclusive world in which everyone can belong. Heather, welcome to the show and to this conversation.
Hi, Jen. That was such a generous intro. Thank you. I'm humbled and honored to be here.
Well, it's true because, I mean, if I'm going to be really honest, which I do prefer to be,
Same.
I prefer that. So in full transparency, everybody, when I had Addie back in 2004, I was trying to remember her birthday. She's 19, and it was pre-Instagram. And I did feel the day that I left the hospital with her, I did feel that I had a maybe yes, I don't know. Does it matter what you think? She belongs, and she is worthy, and she has value, and she is on this earth to make it better. And so I sort of just on my own had this mission, and kind of that's what it was. And I just sort of like had an impact in our own local community, her schools, our church, things like that. And then Instagram occurred, and you came on the scene, and people kept telling me, oh, do you know about the Lucky Few, the Lucky Few, the Lucky Few? And truth be told, I was early years of Addie, and there was a part of me that was like, well, who is this woman, and why is she saying she's lucky? Because this is actually still hard for me, still really hard for me. Addie was maybe, well, you can talk more about when Lucky Few started, but maybe early elementary, and it was hard. And there was parts of me that were still grieving a life that I thought my daughter would get, and even a parenting journey, a momming life that I would have. So I would love for you to just maybe share the story behind the Lucky Few movement and really what inspired you to start it. Because it's impacted me in a positive way, though I didn't understand it at
Yeah.
first. So bring some understanding.
Absolutely. And you're not the first or only person to feel that way. And I have a few books I've written. My first one is called The Lucky Few. And I've had parents say to me, I couldn't read it. Like I could not, parents who have a child with a Down syndrome diagnosis, like I couldn't see that. And I respect that. We all are on our own journey, you know, or I think most people get there, not everybody. I've talked to parents who are way down the line and they're like, this is never how I will feel. And that's them, right? But so the story goes, Macy, our oldest daughter, she has Down syndrome. She's 15 now. And we ended up on the scene on Instagram. The Lucky Few like came onto the scene probably 10 years ago. It was a couple years into Instagram starting. So about 9-10 years ago. But Macy came home, she's adopted. And right there, even there was this narrative around having a child with Down syndrome that even as a parent who adopted, like essentially chose Down syndrome, knowing I was going to have a child with Down syndrome, to get to that point of saying yes to her, I had to face all these ideas around Down syndrome that are all negative. Like this is a disappointment. There is something to grieve here. Don't say yes to this child. Everybody outside of my husband Josh and I were pointing to like, why would you do something like this? Wait for a better child, because we were adopting and we were awaiting family for a baby. And so then it's a very long story, Jen, but Macy enters the picture and I remember bringing her home and very quickly just holding her and thinking, she's a baby. Like what? And she's pretty rad and she's so cute and she's really sweet and she's a great sleeper. And she had a bunch of medical stuff too that we were dealing with that really put Down syndrome on the back burner because we were fighting for her life. But in terms of like a child with Down syndrome that we were told to be so afraid of, I'm like, hold on a second. She's a really rad baby. And I'm actually completely in love with her. And so that kind of started me questioning this narrative around what culture, what society says about Down syndrome and what that means to have Down syndrome or to have a child with Down syndrome or to love someone with Down syndrome. And so I remember this moment at the park. Macy was toddling. Took her first steps at 3 years old. So she was probably a year and a half. She was like scooting on her butt around the park and like pulling herself onto equipment. And I remember looking at her, she like pulled herself up onto something and I was just beaming with pride. And I looked around as a first-time mom. She's my oldest as well. Same with you with Addie. And there was no one else at the park who had Down syndrome. And I had not really ever seen another kid at a park with Down syndrome, another baby. And I was just looking around like thinking, you guys, do you see my kid? She's incredible. And I'm her mom. That's my girl. I'm her mom. I'm the only one here with a kid like her. I felt so lucky to have her. And so as social media goes, we start sharing our story on social media, really with the goal of understanding that we had believed all these negative lies around the narrative of Down syndrome because we didn't know the story of Down syndrome. And so how do we share that story in a way that is honoring and true? And it's not all rainbows and unicorns. Like life, it's complicated and it's hard and there's ups and downs, but that's life. And so how do we incorporate Down syndrome into the story of life? And so we started sharing a picture a day of Macy, just us living our lives. And we started one day I used the hashtag the lucky few because I was overwhelmed with this idea that I felt so lucky and there's so few of us who get to love a person with Down syndrome. So I started saying that. And before you know it, the Down syndrome community felt the same and really just embraced that phrase and started using it as well. And so that's kind of how it started. And then our platform started to grow a little bit. And we ended up, I remember one day I was scrolling through a picture or whatever, as one does on Instagram, and I came across a comment. I remember exactly where I was at my parents' house up in the mountains, local mountains. And somebody said, do you follow this family? Tagged someone. And that person replied back and said, yes, we do. This is why we're adopting Anna. And I was like, whoa. And like my heart skipped a beat and I reached out. I clicked on her name and said, this is wild, but this is who I am. And this is what I read. And can you explain? She said, yes, we're in China right now adopting a little girl with Down syndrome. We've been following your journey and your family inspired us to do that. And I'm like, oh, I was just posting a picture, you know? And that was a moment that turned the tide for me in being really intentional and understanding my impact in my
Mm-hmm.
words and my
Mm-hmm.
photos and what I say. And that was a shift for me too, of like, oh, we're doing a thing here that I can just let happen, or I can intentionally step into.
Wow. It's it's saved lives. Your advocacy has saved lives, and as I'm hearing that story, it has. And I know families who I had a birth diagnosis, so I didn't know till she was born, but I know people who are getting, diagnosis in utero and seeing the lucky few, and it causes them to pause on decisions that they thought they would make, that they then go on to go like, this child does have value. They are worthy, and they can have a quality life, and we can belong in this space. And I think, so I know how it's impacted. I've heard story after story, and that one was so powerful. And I know how it's impacted other families and other homes, and how it's impacting our world. It impacted me to like lean in, even though at first I was like, wait, what? And I dug into your story because that's how I am. I'm like, well, let me see who started this whole thing. Because by the time I hopped in, it was kind of already like this growing movement. You had written The Lucky Few. People were wearing socks. There's this whole, like, all the socks on World Down Syndrome Day and all of that. And read the book to know more about that. We'll link all the books that you've written. But it caused me to lean in, learn more about you, and then actually desire to have a perspective shift. Desire to see, like, I loved Addie, and she did change. She gave me more of an eternal perspective. She actually rocked my theology a little bit in the best possible way, and caused me to grow in my love, grow even in my understanding of God. She did so much inside of our home. I think that there was just this part of me that's like, but outside the four walls, it's hard. And I felt like I was battling alone, and I learned quickly as I researched about you and the lucky few and really what you were for. Was like, oh, I'd like to join this army. I actually want to be, this is what I believe. This is what I know has happened inside. Can I be brave enough to take it outside? And knowing there was this community that existed, I sort of jumped in like, okay, I want to be a part, because it's like the values, the belonging, the worth, it all resonated. I just actually feared rejection from my child. I really feared it. And that made me sad. And that's what kind of, I think, honestly made things harder for me. Was I believe this, but will you out there believe it? And do I want to subject her to, like, being a punching bag for the world? And so you impacted me, because it really did shift the narrative in so many ways, and propelled me forward in my own advocacy. So let's talk about Heather the advocate, because you really, I know it started with Mason, but you really have become an advocate for individuals with Down syndrome. And I would love for you to talk about some of the key misconceptions or stereotypes that you believe need to be addressed. Because those were the things that I think I was like, ooh, but I know what people think, and wasn't totally sure how to address those. And so if you could share those, and how can society work towards a more inclusive and understanding environment?
Okay, everything that you just said, I resonate with so much of it. And I always say, when people are like, what's the hardest thing about having a child with Down syndrome? My answer has always been, and it still is, the hardest thing about having a child with Down syndrome has never for me been Down syndrome. It's been a world that rejects my child.
That's right.
It's been a world that's not created for people with Down syndrome. Every part of Down syndrome that's hard is that world.
That's
that
right.
fights what Down syndrome is, including my own internal understandings of what it was, or what it is, that I had to undo. That's the hard part.
Mm-hmm.
And then raising a kid is just hard.
Right.
Period, right? I mean, it's beautiful, but there's the hard
Yeah.
things there.
I'm saying with you, Addie was actually my easiest baby, and I have 4.
Yeah.
And she was easy, honestly. And even in early years of, we're guiding our kids, we're helping. She is like so soft-hearted, absolute joy. Now, as a teenager, like Addie makes us all laugh the most, truly. And I got some funny kids with some quick wits, but we will just die over the things that Addie does and says. She's taught me so much. She's so uninhibited in ways that I think the rest of us wish we would be. Like sometimes she actually has caused less inhibition in me. Sometimes I'm like, yeah, we are just going to dance in the middle of the street right now, because why not? That guy just drove by with a really great song on, and we're going to like wave at him and we're going to dance, and who really cares? So I'm with you. Down syndrome itself is not the challenge. It's the world that is not created for it or doesn't embrace it. So how can we? How can we help the world be more inclusive and help them negate their misconceptions?
I know. Oh gosh, is this not the question of a lifetime? I think stereotypes are an interesting thing because I believe they exist because there's a majority of a people group that exhibit those qualities sometimes. So but then it's not fair to put everybody to like put everyone in one space. So there's things within Down syndrome I'm sure you've heard this, like they're so loving, they love to hug, they're so happy, oh, I love people with Down syndrome and they're just so sweet and love cuddling. And I'm like, that's not Macy by any means. And it is a lot of people with Down syndrome. They'll come give you a hug, they'll say I love you, they're happy go lucky most of the time or whatever, but that's not all people with Down syndrome. So I think it's important for people outside the community to understand that each person with Down syndrome is their own unique individual. And yes, there are going to be traits that are similar. There's going to be a similar line for a lot of the people within that community. And my favorite is a lack of inhibition. I've found that in most people with Down syndrome, so I have 3 kids. I should tell your audience. I don't know. And my oldest is 15, Macy. She has Down syndrome. I have a 12-year-old daughter, Truly, who has no disabilities. And I have an 9-year-old son, August, who has Down syndrome. And they all came to me through adoption. So my son, he is less uninhibited, but Macy is like your Addie, just like this is who I am. And I'm hope you're going to love me, and this is who you are, and I'm going to love you. And it really is freeing. It's just so beautiful. So I think that for me, what I've had to do, I'll say this. We live in a culture in which we have been told there's a best way to be human. And I think as we've gotten on in the last decade or so, with social media being just like the leader in how we do life, I guess, how we perceive people, how we perceive ourselves, what we pursue, what we don't pursue, or let's say has an incredible influence on how we live as a people, that we are leaning more and more into this idea that we need to be better. That someone's doing it better. Comparison,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And if only we can do this, then we are, I don't know, more worthy.
Whatever.
Then we get the thing. And I have a daughter, Mason, that I'm not limiting her in this because I don't want to limit my child, but the reality is with her disability, there are things that she will never do no matter how hard she tries. The boxes will never be checked. And society is going to say to her, therefore, you don't deserve an equitable space here if you can't check these boxes. So that for me as a parent, it's like, well, wait a second. No, that's not what gives her value and worth. And I have to then start questioning all of my entire belief system. So I think it's important for us as we're even, instead of looking at stereotypes, it's like, well, what do we define as human? What is the thing that we say gives a human value and worth? And it's a question I think people need to ask themselves. And it's a question that the answer for me has changed significantly because of my daughter. And my answer today, and as lifelong learners, it may change, right? But my answer today is it is the heart beating in your chest and the breath in your lungs that gives you value and worth in this world. And period, full stop. Now, that doesn't mean that we stop, that we end, that's it. We're growing and learning constantly. So how do we grow to be the best version of ourselves? But the best version of ourselves, not the best version that society tells us to be, right?
Correct.
So I think when we're talking, for me, that's kind of like the brass, what's the saying? Whatever.
I don't know, but it's brass. Who cares?
Something.
Whatever.
That's the foundation. It's like,
Yes.
yes, you could, I think when it comes to inclusion and belonging and seeing humanity in people, it would be nice if there was do A through F, and then you will be a person who doesn't make assumptions about disabled people. But that's just not it. It's a foundational thing. It's a condition of the heart. And so we have to really break away these ideologies and ways of thinking that are harmful, that we didn't even know we had, right? Like there's some self-awareness there. There's some admitting to not know, like, oh, I can't know what I don't know. So what do I need to know so I can do better? And for me, that has been just like, there's this idea too of like ableism, that able-bodied, non-disabled people are better than disabled people. And our entire society is built upon ableism. This is what every structure, every system, it is just there.
Yeah.
And we have to address it. We have to call it out. And then we have to do the hard work of undoing it. I had to do that in my own life. As a mother, you have a child with a disability. It's not like done. I'm no longer ableist. Same with race. Like I'm white, I'm a Caucasian, and my middle daughter is Black. Just because I have a Black child doesn't mean like, oh, I'm no longer racist. Like you have to do the hard work of undoing the thing that society really like allowed you to become or believe or stand upon without us even realizing it. Right?
100%. I think that this has been the journey for me, and I'm still learning.
Yes, constantly.
I think this is what was like so disruptive to me probably at first when Addie was born and I got the diagnosis. I mean, I am pretty outspoken. I do tend to live my life out loud, and I have said things that I'm like, I look back and go, I cannot believe I said that.
Same.
And people would even like be like, wow, that's pretty. I don't even want to repeat the statements that I've made in my process and in my journey, because I had some cultural concepts myself. And Addie, and I was undone.
Yes.
I was undone when she was born, and she continues to be. I always say, I'm like, oh, the greatest gift God ever gave me was different. Different.
Yes.
She is different. I actually didn't even always like to say that. I always I camped out for a while on a phrase more alike than different. You actually helped me be like, actually, no, she's just different. And sure, just to your point about like all people with Down syndrome, there is some similar strains, but they're not all the same. Like they're different, and it's okay to be different, and it's beautiful to be different. What's the title of your recent book about different?
My first children's book is called Different, A Great Thing to Be.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I think that helped me go, oh, yeah, she's different. And it's so fascinating because I'm always championing. Now someone's mowing my lawn.
Oh, hilarious. I can't hear it. Okay. But my guy's gone.
Okay, well, here we go. But like, it's odd how I champion my other 3 children who do not have any kind of disability to be unique. Stand up for what you believe in. Who cares what everybody says? But sometimes I would find myself trying to get Addie to like fit in, because if you don't fit in, babe, the ball's going to drop and they're going to actually ask you to leave and you're going to be rejected. And now I'm just like, I mean, it's 19 years in, I'm still learning, but I'm like, who cares? And what matters? I am learning what value is too.
Yes.
I have come to a place where I'm like, actually, the heart beating in your chest and the breath coming from your lungs, you are enough. You are worthy. And it
reflects back on us. Like that's the challenging part for me, is if I'm saying that about my kids and I'm telling the world to believe that about my kids, and then I'm looking in the mirror, or I'm looking at the thing that the person next to me is doing better than me, and I'm so discouraged because I'm not enough, right? I can't say that about myself. I can't say that about myself. So it really is. Yeah. I say Macy is the gift of my life. Not that she's my favorite child, not that my other children aren't a gift, but because of who she is in this world, she has made me ask questions that I didn't know I needed to ask, and undo things in me that I didn't know needed to be undone.
Yes, 100%. You talked about just defining worth and how that's changed over time, and it might continue to evolve.
Yeah.
We have these like Jones Tribe family values, and they have also evolved and changed pre-kids. And one of the things that we now value in our home is growth,
Mm-hmm.
and that is just stretching and becoming the person God created you to be. And I don't know that I always valued growth. I think there was like excellence and achievement and
Mm-hmm.
whatever the narratives of the world. And then that doesn't, when you have a beautiful child into your world who has disabilities, and specifically we're talking Down syndrome, you stop giving a rip
Mm-hmm.
about some of these things. That doesn't mean not because they can't, not because they're not able. Not to the ableism point that
Sure.
you're
Yeah.
making,
Yeah.
but not because they are not capable, or because they don't have something to offer the world, or because they don't belong. They Addie has grown, and it's beautiful to watch. And
Mm-hmm.
so I would be curious what you would have to say about what advice that you would offer to other parents or caregivers, and honestly just the broader community, to support and empower individuals with Down syndrome. Because my problem is not Addie,
Mm-hmm.
and Addie is not a problem,
Yes.
and she has limitations. There are things
Yep.
that she cannot do that come very naturally and easy for my other kids to do, and they're all kind of the same age. They're all teenagers, and those things limit what the world will, like the spaces the world lets her in. And
Yes.
I don't think it has to,
Mm-hmm.
but I think the world doesn't recognize, doesn't realize, actually, just because she can't do that doesn't mean she shouldn't get a seat at the table, because what she does
Totally.
have to offer, she has things to offer that's actually going to make the world a much better place to
Yep.
live in. So what would you
Yeah.
say so that it can support and empower individuals with Down syndrome? Really, the lesson to be learned is outside of them.
Yeah.
They come full packing with lots to give.
Right.
We just haven't created a space that welcomes them to be able to give their gifts.
Yeah. I mean, you said it. Yeah. I think, no, it's great. I think that you're familiar with this when you have a child who goes through the educational system, who has a disability, and there's a thing called an IEP and all that. There's this phrase that we use a lot, that's access and opportunity. And so what do we need for my child to have access and opportunity? And access and opportunity isn't the same as success or achieving the goal, right? But we all as humans deserve equal access and opportunity to things. And so in order for Macy and Addie and my son August to be members of their communities, they're going to need to have access to their community and the same opportunity as other kids. But they're going to have Down syndrome in that.
Yes.
And they're going to approach it differently. And so I think what we need to do, what I encourage people to do, is to be honest with themselves and look at our kids and say, ask yourself, do I see them as fully human? Or do I think that there's something to change within their disability? Do I think that their disability is something to fix? We need to ask ourselves that, because if the answer is yes, then there's some internal work that needs to be done. And most likely there's ways that probably you view your non-disabled self and your non-disabled kids as like how that there's a way for them to have value and worth. There's things they need to do in order to be a human with value and worth, which is as harmful for a non-disabled person as it is for not as harmful, also harmful for non-disabled people. So I think again, it's like you want there to be this checklist, but there's such an ethos to it. What does your heart say about my kid with Down syndrome? And when they enter the space, are you like, oh my gosh, they're an asset with Down syndrome? Or is it like, oh, how can I help them be more like someone without Down syndrome? And once they are more like someone without Down syndrome, then they get a bigger space and they get more say and they get more access. So it's that heart, right? Like, what is in our heart? What is the ethos here? Do we see I call it like intrinsic value and worth. Do you
Yep. Yep.
see the value and worth in my child that is not up for debate?
Mhm.
And if you don't, that's okay, because neither did I at one point. So let's not put shame,
Right.
but that then is an opportunity to learn and grow, an
Yep.
opportunity to step towards relationship, to read a book, to read a blog, to follow the person, to make an introduction, so that you can then grow and become the person who does see the Addies and the Macy's and the Augies of the
Mhm.
world as full humans with value and worth that deserve the same access and opportunity as everybody else.
Yes, it is a work of the heart. And
Yes.
with one thing that we have done with all of our kids as we have been, as, as we've parented them, and is we have really attempted to do heart transformation over behavior modification. It's like
I love it.
values over rules. But I think that applies to this conversation as adults, as a non-disabled human. Like, why would I be trying to like behavior modify? It's not this list of what to do. It's like, actually just examine your heart. And if you have a heart, if your heart is transformed, you will behave in different ways.
Yeah.
And you will see people in a different light. And every opportunity I've had to attend a retreat, you host the Lucky Few retreats. And every time I've had an opportunity to attend, and I've been to a couple now, I come home and I tell my husband, who also is like, calls it intrinsic worth. He's like, this is like so not about just Down syndrome. It is about seeing the intrinsic worth of a human being, which doesn't matter what anything external or any circumstances or any physical traits or anything like that, or any like chromosomes. I come home and I'm like, yes, I get to connect with other moms who get it. Yes, I learn new things and I'm connected to the resources and perhaps next steps, and we help educate each other on some of the dailies.
Mm-hmm.
But I come home accepting myself more.
Yeah.
I come home and go, wow, in this space, it's okay not to be okay.
Yes.
It's okay to not have it figured out. It's okay to actually even have a different perspective of a mom who also has a child with Down syndrome. It's okay to not all think alike and to be on different phases of the journey. So that's one way that like parents, caregivers, of people or kids with Down syndrome can like get involved with the Lucky Few. But just as we close this out, are there specific like initiatives or projects that the Lucky Few movement can offer to anyone? Like whether you are like even have been touched by a person with Down syndrome, because I know my audience and I know a lot of my listeners outside of maybe hearing my stories about Addie have never even been touched by a person with Down syndrome. That was my story 19 years ago. And so how, Heather, can people like get involved, learn more, be a part of the movement that the Lucky Few is?
Yeah, I mean, you can go to theluckyfew.com and there's just lots of different resources there that you can access pretty quickly. We believe very much in the power of storytelling and being able to see yourself in the story. And so the Lucky Few has created something called This is Down Syndrome, where we are capturing the stories of people with Down syndrome and those who love them, which you can find online as well. And so you just get to hear little snippets of a story from a teacher or a parent or a grandparent, a sibling or a coworker or a friend or cheer team member who can just share how this person they know with Down syndrome and love has affected their lives. You get that little glimpse. And then I've written some books that I hope can be used as tools to help. I've got 2 adult trade books that are nonfiction. And then I've written 2 children's books that are picture books, really for classrooms K through 2nd grade-ish, that can be used as a tool to really start those conversations young with our kids, because our kids are so much less inhibited and they approach difference and things they don't understand curiously, not judgmentally. I don't know when that shifts, but it's right around that age when we start to be a little more judgment, a little less curious. So that's a big one of the tools that I feel the most passionate about is my children's books, in order for people to have that as a tool to help create more inclusive spaces of belonging. And then I have a podcast, the Lucky Few podcast, And it's another tool that parents can listen. It's a lot of people in the Down syndrome space listen, but it really is an opportunity for someone outside of the space who wants to know more to get a glimpse into our hearts, the heart of our community, to get a little more connected on there.
Yeah. Okay. So I will link all of those resources in the show notes. But I actually really love what you said about the next generation and why, and the passion that you have toward the children's books you've written and educating the next generation. Because as I've entered into this new season with Addie, and she actually is in the world, no longer in the school system so much, there has been a part of me, it's like, oh, like I see it, but you guys don't all see it yet.
Yes.
And like, they're the same generation as me, it's these Gen Xers that are kind of running the world. And I'm like, oh, you don't see it, but actually my kids do. Gen Z kind of gets it. And
is that interesting?
And my kids, it's fascinating. Sometimes they teach me on judgment because they could have had an interaction or an engagement with some kid at school or whatever, and they're telling me about it. And I will be like, oh, well, why did that happen? And they're like, oh, Mom, I think that they're like actually on the spectrum. It's no big deal. And they don't have the judgment or the concepts and I know some of that is having a sibling with a disability in their world. It's very normalized. It is kind of not a big deal. It's super normal. And then I just think people like you advocating, I just believe, I'm like, I want to keep shouting it for my generation who's currently ruling the world, but I don't know what change will happen there. But the next generation, I'm like, hope in the next generation. So get those kids' books. We have them. We've shared them. They've been read. And because I just really, in the classrooms, because I do think that if we can do this work with those that are coming behind us.
Can I tell you a super quick story? I know
please do. No, I don't care. Tell it.
My son August was in second grade last year, and I went into his class and volunteered. His teacher let me come in once a week and read books to the students, and we did like this whole reading lessons together, and it was the sweetest. But I always brought diverse books, and as much as I could, books that centered characters with disabilities. And I got to know the students really well. And he was in a general education classroom. And I was on a field trip one day, and one of the students comes up to me. He goes, "Oh my gosh, Mrs. Avis." And he doesn't have a disability. He goes, "Mrs. Avis, my brother has a disability." I'm like, "Ruben, wow." He was so enthusiastic. I'm like, "Tell me more." He said, he just had to get glasses. Isn't that great? And it was just this moment of, we're just having a conversation around disability. And what I thought in second grade, I probably felt bad about disability. And here's this kid who's like, "Look, amazing. Okay." And then you move on with your life. And I think that what Addie and Macy and my son August deserve, I don't know. And this sounds pessimistic. I just am being pragmatic. I don't know that it will exist in their lifetime. I don't think what Macy deserves, she's not going to get in her lifetime. However, I have so much hope too. Yes. And we have all of these kids coming up with just opportunities to be around people who are different than them and to learn how to love all kinds of people with all kinds of differences. And I have a lot of hope.
Me too. So let's end it there. Thank you so much, Heather. Definitely go follow The Lucky Few. Start there, and then all of the things will be linked because you definitely need the books. And I mean, just start from the beginning. Start from her. Just get them all. And definitely listen to the podcast, especially if your life is impacted. Well, either way, but I love listening to the podcast because I get educated. I learn from other people who both have Down syndrome, and you interview a lot of people with Down syndrome on the podcast. And I love that, and other families and educators and doctors and all of the things. And so definitely listen in to the podcast. But thank you so much, Heather, for your time. I love the conversation.
Me too.
I probably talk to you a lot longer, but we're going to call it good.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening.